Hey there, I'm Vasco, your host, and today we have quite a special episode for you. If you've looked at your podcast player, you will have noticed that this episode is quite a bit longer than usual, but that's a good thing though. Today we interview a tech leader. It can be a CTO, a VP of engineering, the kind of people we tend to work with in leadership teams. We are in the CTO series of episodes here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, and this series collects first-person accounts of what it is to lead tech organizations so that we, Scrum Masters and Agile coaches, can learn about their struggles, their goals, but also what they've succeeded with and how. So grab a cup of coffee or go for a walk, and make sure you check the show notes after listening to this episode, as all of those incredibly important lessons you don't want to lose will be right there, documented for your benefit. For now, let's dive into the universe of tech leaders and learn how we can help them. So come on with me. Let's listen. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this very special series of interviews. We are doing the Chief Technology Officer series of interviews. And for this episode, we have with us Alexander Grosse. Hey, Alexander, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So Alexander is a seasoned professional with a rich background in major corporations like Nokia, as well as experience with startups and being a corporate venture builder at BCG Digital Ventures. That's it, BCG Digital Ventures. Currently, he's a Chief Product and Technology Officer at VO. We'll talk more about what that company does as well. And he invests in early stage startups and offers expert advice, leveraging his experience also as the co-author of O'Reilly's book, Scaling Teams. So, Alexander, that was a short intro. As we get started, tell us a little bit more about your unusual role of Chief Product and Technology Officer.
Yes. So I started engineering. I started as an engineer, had a few engineering jobs, and had a lot of jobs where I either got handed a specification, or at best I could comment, hey, this is technically not possible. And I always felt like what we call waterfall, right? So business comes with an idea, product management does a big specification, and engineers implement it. And I saw lots of inefficiencies in that. When I then moved to an engineering leadership role, like I was at SoundCloud, and I headed the engineering team, I was incentivized by uptime and numbers of engineers hired. Product was incentivized by business KPIs, by features delivered. But engineering is obviously a big, big part of that, and incentives were not aligned, right? So do you go for the last bits of uptime? Do you develop new features? Shouldn't that be a joint discussion and decision? And if product and engineering work really well together, I think it will be. But if product and engineering lead the reporting lines meet at the CEO, it's difficult if those two disciplines don't agree. Right? And you see then finger pointing from engineering to product, this roadmap, which product created without engineering is completely unreasonable. The product manager says the engineers are only refactoring. And the typical finger pointing, and it's just, for me, it's just, this is not where we should spend our energy, right? So specifically a startup, I mean, every company, but specifically a startup might have 6 to 12 months to live. We need to focus on solving the problems of our users to make the business successful. And over that, also, I'm not the first CTPO ever, right? I saw that these move towards moving all the disciplines involved in creating software, so this product design, engineering, maybe QA, depends on the company if they have a dedicated QA department. Should be one team. They should be incentivized by the same thing. And so I tried it out 3.5 years ago for the first time at Issue. And it completely resolved the fights, the interdepartmental fights, which were pretty heavy at the beginning. And we were able to create this joint teams where people collaborate towards a common goal.
So if you think about it, like, because as you described it, it sounds so logical, right? Like it makes no sense to have product and engineering with different incentives because they won't help each other. What still keeps our industry stuck in this idea that product and engineering are different things and different organizations and need to have different goals?
Oh, that's a good question. So if I now go very, very long, back at the start of my career, we had a startup. We developed a content management system, and back then there was not a role of a product manager. So I was the CTO. The engineers reported to me, and before our call I tried to remember who came up with the feature ideas, and I couldn't. So probably I made it up. It's my assumption. So we had this kind of all the decision power in one hand in the beginning, without really thinking about the users. I mean, we created tons of startups back then where user research and finding out what users actually want were not part of it. And then the product management discipline came up. And I think this is then where they got separated. And I think why they're not joining together right now, I think it's pretty hard to do it, right? You need someone. You won't find anybody who is equally deep on product design and engineering, but finding people who are at least good enough, which is a very fuzzy term I now know on, and I'm leaving design out right now, which I shouldn't, but let's simplify it because it's so complicated. Who's either strong enough on product and really good at engineering, or vice versa, is difficult. Right. And I think finding these people and educating these people is what is missing.
So, of course, because you now have to do that role, obviously you need to think about, where do I find these people? How do I train them? How do I give enough product knowledge to the engineering people? How do I give enough engineering knowledge to the people that have a product background? So how do you do it in practice, Alexander?
Yeah. So first, all our teams are cross-disciplinary and led by a product manager, a tech lead, and a designer. So these three should commonly own the roadmap, the development of this team. Does it work perfectly in each team? No. And I think I hope that it will work at one point in time perfectly, but I'm not so hopeful, because sometimes you have seniority mismatch, you have different personalities. Sometimes you have a tech lead who's only interested in tech. Sometimes there's a very senior PM who at least thinks he or she knows exactly what they want to do. But that's our goal, right? So first in the teams, it should be that this triangle of, so we call it PED, is commonly
what you said PED, what does that mean?
Product engineering design. Is jointly owning what the team is doing. In the end, if you talk about a RASI, right, in the end, the product manager needs to make the final decision what is being built. The engineering needs to make the final decision how it's being built. And the designer needs to make the final decision how it looks like, or how the UX behaves. And then if you go the levels up, we have, in my team, I actually call it the builders. It is just to emphasize that we're one team, right? And it's very cumbersome to say product design engineering every time. So that's why I already left design out sometimes. We have a leadership team, which is consisting out of all disciplines in our department. And for example, together we create the product strategy, right? So the design has to say in product, the engineering has to say in product strategy.
And that means the leadership team works on that product strategy with the input from the teams, obviously, but they are the ones working on the product strategy.
Yeah. And obviously, I have a VP of product. He spends more time of it than, for example, my head of AI. But my head of AI owns part of the strategy and contributes to the others. And so with all this equal seat at the table leadership, what we're trying to build, I hope that in a year or two, we have quite a few candidates who could do it, either at our company or at a different company.
So I'm sure there are some great stories you have to share about how you came to think about this idea, the product engineering and design kind of, let's call it triad, for example, or the three amigos, somebody might call it. So what was that pivotal moment? Like, when did you come up with the idea that, hey, wait a minute, I really need to try this different approach and I'm going to try it this way?
So before I joined BCG Digital Ventures, it's a venture builder, and it's heavily user research, design thinking based. And I thought design thinking, okay, now I have to do what the designers say. And then I read a book about design thinking, and I think it's called Change by Design. I don't remember the author now. And design thinking is more about that. And he said, what is the difference between a cross-disciplinary and an interdisciplinary team? And he said a cross-disciplinary team is a team consisting out of several disciplines, where each discipline owns their own domain and defends it. An interdisciplinary team is a team where the whole team owns the challenges, and the best idea at the table wins. And that description really stuck with me. And so this led also to quite a few changes when I came in at Digital Ventures, right? So back then we had something that was called an innovation sprint, where we looked at potential ideas and assessed them. In the beginning, there was no engineers part of it because, well, they're there for later, right? When we implement stuff. And then it was actually very easy to convince everybody to add engineering to it, which was surprising. So I expected a fight, but there was zero fight. And we actually sold a few ventures based on engineering ideas, right? And it doesn't mean that engineers have better ideas than other disciplines, but each discipline might have really good ideas, and looking at a problem from all different angles is just the key.
So when I think about this idea of what you defined just now as interdisciplinary teams, right? Like together we own the delivery. This sounds very closely aligned with the whole idea that at least Scrum is trying to put forward, right? Like the whole team, which includes the product, owns the deliverable. And when you talked about the origin of, the struggles and so on, you talked also about that initial experience of starting from this waterfall-ish idea that somebody does the design, somebody does the specification, and ultimately somebody does the coding. It sounds to me that in your career, you have had this progression from understanding what doesn't work in role separation to a point right now where you believe and actually have put in practice this concept of shared ownership. Is that how you would describe it?
Yes. Except maybe I understood the Scrum setup a bit differently, because so every Scrum meeting where somebody explained Scrum, I had the same question, right? Initially, there were the Scrum roles explained, right? The product owner, the Scrum Master, and the team. And my first question was always, is the product owner part of the team? And mostly, first of all, there always is some silence. And then most people said no. And I mean, I haven't used Scrum for a long time. So back then, it was part of the Scrum Master role was also to protect the team against the product owner, who is driven by business and wants to squeeze as much out of the engineering team as possible. And so in that sense, in ideal sense, I agree with you. How it worked on the ground, I've seen it working very differently.
So how would you describe what you guys now do at VO? Like how would you call the process? Do you call it VO, or do you call it agile, or do you call it something else? What do you call it?
We say always agile with not a capital A, a small a.
Okay.
So
why that?
Follow. Well, I don't say to anybody use Scrum or use Kanban, right? But there are certain things like work as one team, work in short cycles, do retrospectives. Like there's some guidelines in it. And if you look at the Agile Manifesto, at the 10 principles, they're surprisingly valid, right? And I think we would write them probably a bit differently, word them a bit differently now, but they would, in the essence, would stay the same. So I would say we're based on the Agile principles, but not following anything which can be sold at the moment, at least.
Absolutely. And for me, I find that so interesting because as you were describing, work as one team, work in short cycles, do retrospectives. I very often, when I go into a team, I don't try to impose anything. I tell them that we only need to start with two things, a time box and a retrospective. And then everything else will emerge as needed, right? Because we are facing challenges every day. And it is that ability to adapt to those challenges and recover if it's a problem, or adapt and innovate if it's a challenge that we want to overcome. All of those things are what makes us an agile team and ultimately organization. Is that also how you describe it?
Yes. I think that's very valid, except that I think in the startup world nowadays, these things you describe are given, right? So people start that way by default, right? I think we are partially out of that stage where there's an agile transformation. I think startups now start with small letter A agile process, and it needs to get optimized over time and improved for certain. But I think this from waterfall to agile is gone in a part of the industry.
I do hope you're right. Unfortunately, I see so many companies, even some neighboring companies to you, around you, rehiring project managers and going back to linear process models. I am not so sure. How do you see the community over there in Berlin where you work today? Do you see more companies kind of really starting with this, what you call small a agile? Or do you see also companies, maybe bigger companies perhaps, going back to the traditional plan everything up front and manage it with a project manager, linear thinking?
I mean, at least the smaller ones, I think they start like most of them. I obviously cannot say all of them. If you talk about the bigger ones, I know that maybe the biggest one, which started with Z, went to a lot of different approaches. I don't know what they are now. But for example, in my team, I introduced Gantt charts and project managers and quality gates for our hardware department, which is a very different animal. So what's maybe very special about our team is that on one hand, we develop a camera for sports, which is hardware. And hardware you have to develop differently, right? You cannot just build, measure, learn is not an option. Maybe a little bit at the end, but you cannot ship faulty hardware, right? It might kill your company.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I never thought I would introduce something like a gate model in my life, but here we are. Then we have an AI team, which works in 6 to 9 months cycles, depending on the feature. And then we have the typical web team, which works in nearly daily cycles. And now I have this interesting challenge of marrying those different mindsets.
Yeah, and actually, let's go there because I think that's a super interesting topic. I mean, I could have a whole 1-hour episode with you about agile in hardware, and maybe we should, but maybe we invite people who are doing also hardware to bring that perspective. So thanks for the idea, because I'll definitely work on that. We have quite a few people here in Helsinki where I am, because of course Nokia was here and there was a lot of work done on the hardware side as well. But let's go to the challenges, because you introduced a challenge that is very interesting, right? Like you have 3 different process models. You have the hardware, the AI, and then the web, you called it, but I guess the continuous software delivery type of process. Is this marrying these 3? Is that your biggest challenges? Or what are the biggest challenges you are facing currently in your role?
Marrying was maybe the wrong word I chose, right? Because these approaches don't need to get married, right? We just need to maybe learn from each other and develop and transport best practices. But it's definitely, for me, it's a challenge I'm still looking for the 100% perfect hardware launch, right? Where we just launch and everything works. And we just released a new camera a few months ago. And it was not a catastrophe, but it could have been better. And so the interesting challenge then is to combine the commercial needs, which is certainly behind a new camera, with, okay, let's release when we're done, right? Which is obviously from our perspective the best approach to. Damn, we don't have a camera to sell anymore. We need to release the new one. And there's always these tensions and and then there are a lot of factors. There's supply chain optimizations, risk scenarios, how you release hardware in a perfect way without impacting the business negatively. And there will never be perfection, right? So, right. So if you sell hardware and you cannot sell the new one, and you're out of the old one, then you're in a tough situation.
So if I understood you correctly, now I might be jumping into conclusions here, but I want to check. So if I understood you correctly, what you're talking about is that hardware presents specific challenges when it comes to having a release date, so the commercial needs, and also having the necessary renewal, because of course there's depreciation over time for any product that is out there. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and definitely the first point is if your business depends on hardware, then the release is a high pressure point in time for your company, right? It needs to be very carefully planned, and you need to look at all possible risks and at least openly accept them, but not ignore them. And I think this is just a big collaboration between the commercial part of the business, between the supply chain, the risk management part of the business. It's for me, it's a new world coming from software, right? Because software, you always have the product out there, and you were just, okay, but this feature, you need to release this feature, but it's this feature is nothing against, you cannot release the whole product your company depends on.
So when it comes to hardware, of course, as I said, I think we will need to have another episode where we dive deeper into the hardware aspects that are specific to hardware, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that can be enabled by hardware, but doesn't necessarily depend on hardware. I mean, Tesla is a great example. They design a car and then maybe it lasts for 10 years, but then they deliver new software to that car over those 10 years and the car gets new features, right? So but
they still need to recall it in case the hardware goes wrong.
Absolutely. So what I understood from what you were saying is that quality becomes a much more important aspect than it would be in a, let's say, daily release software rhythm.
Yes. So quality, release management, also project program management becomes certainly a necessity, right? You try to get rid of project management, or the dedicated role of a project manager. But we had a dedicated program manager for this release, and I think it was a great idea. Usually, if I look at a startup and they have a program manager, I would get nervous. In this case, we really needed that role.
Yeah, because you're trying to get quite a few streams to come together at a specific point in time, and you need to be actively assessing, maybe even forecasting risks and being ready for those, because it's commercial, it's hardware, and it's ultimately software as well. Have you been able to find a way to kind of make software the part that is flexible, right? The name comes from software. So have you been able to make your software processes sufficiently adaptable to the surprises that inevitably come from the hardware side of the projects?
I mean, we obviously have a firmware on a camera, and the firmware can sometimes mitigate issues. And the firmware we can release bi-weekly if necessary. But there's a limit to what you can fix with software, right? So And sometimes you see surprises a year after the hardware release in the hardware.
Yeah.
These are always the worst cases.
And as hardware gets more complex, of course, then the surprises are more likely, more probable. I remember when working at Nokia that we had cycles where the hardware came in and then we needed to work with software for 6 months to try to work around a hardware feature bug. Because there was no way to going back and redesigning because of supply chain and all of that comes with it.
But then you go back to the agile in hardware, right? How can you build prototypes as quickly as possible, include software teams, and you won't get to daily things, but right. And then now, back to your point about marrying agile and hardware.
Absolutely. And I'm definitely going to set up an episode on that because I think we have a lot to learn there. But now coming back to the role that you have, Chief Product and Technology Officer, one of the key challenges I imagine might be to create that productive collaboration between business and technology. Now, because you're responsible also for product, we're including product and technology here. So what are some of the key practices or strategies that you have learned and, of course, even implemented now at Veo to help foster this collaboration between the business side and in your case, the product and technology side?
I mean, there are some, I would say, obvious, straightforward thing is right, just building good relationship with those people, which sounds easier than it actually is. So in our setup, my department is actually accountable for churn. Means we look at the churn numbers, we look at what's happening, and we have to take action or distribute action if we see something developing into the wrong direction. This already creates a lot of alignment with the commercial teams. And then maybe let's take a small step back and talk about how we sell the software, right? So the vast majority of our sales are through a sales team. And a smaller part is going to people just order on our website. So we own the funnel on our website. Sales is obviously owning what they do, and the commercial team is also owning pricing and packaging. But in our churn, we can see that a lot of people always churn because of price, and that might not mean anything. But so we have this discussion. We constantly have workshops, and I think aligning incentives, and I'm now talking again about incentives, aligning incentives a bit, right? So that we are not just incentivized by feature delivery or something, but we actually also incentivized by commercial numbers is key here. And then maybe it's also important to say that what makes people buy a product is not necessarily what keeps them in the product. So people churn, that is not necessarily we need to implement an idea from sales. We also have to work very closely with customer support, which is, they hear more about what is sparking the customers when they actually after purchase. And so I think these two collaborations are key.
It's very interesting that you said that your department, so technology and product, is responsible for churn, because this is unusual, right? In many organizations that I've worked with, churn is usually either on the marketing or on the sales side, depending on what kind of business model and go-to-market strategy they have. Why did you come to that? Was that part of the Chief Product and Technology Officer change that you wanted to implement? Why did you, and how did you come to own churn?
I raised a hand in a management meeting when we discussed churn, and then I was the first one to raise a hand to, hey, I want to be accountable for this one. Because I think this is a necessary step to work well together with revenue. Like you said, I've seen churn in customer support, right? This is where I've seen churn response. I have never seen it in the marketing and sales maybe. But I mean, what is the closest business number the product can influence? And that's people leaving us, right? And they might leave us for price or packaging reasons, but a lot of people leave leave because, the product is not giving me what I want. So for me, it's this very straightforward metric to own, and one which brings us much closer to business, which I think is very, very valuable.
And I think also, I don't know if that was your experience, but it sounds to me that it can be a real great catalyst to work together with sales, because sales,
yes,
if they don't own churn, they are most likely going to try to sell many more copies of the product and not really worry, is this the right customer for the product, because they don't care. But for you, that's important. So you end up having to work with them to even discuss things like, who are the right customers to go after.
Yeah, I think this setup depends on the actual organization. So we are lucky that we have a sales team there's sometimes sales teams where people come in for half a year, try to sell as many as possible, doesn't work, they leave, next person come in, and they usually just think about their own numbers. We're very lucky that we don't have this setup in Veo, right? We are very passionate people who have been with us some people have been with us for 5 years and worked in sales, and they understand the business, they understand the product. And quite a few of them are ex-football, semi or professional football players. And they feel about it, they understand it. I think in a different setup, the split could also be a difficult one, right? If you have these salespeople who only come in for half a year, try to sell as many as possible, they don't care about churn. And I could tell them whatever I want. They might not listen because their money is on the line. So I think this is something which works well in our environment. It might not work that well in a different one.
Yeah, that definitely something that needs to be looked into depending on the context. But I really like that initiative that you took of raising your hand, as you said, and owning churn, because it is a very important number for product companies that very often gets ignored. And I mean, I remember working with clients on churn projects where we did a lot of experiments and tried to figure out what was not allowing us to get those better renewal numbers at the end. That's what we want. So I do understand how important it is. And I also understand how difficult it might be to actually work together with sales. So that's why I wanted to ask that question, because it's really important that they also feel that we are helping them, right? That's an important aspect as well.
I mean, to demonstrate that sounds a bit, I wanted to say demonstrate goodwill, but it's actually not. I definitely looked very closely at the feature requests from sales in the beginning, and I tried to group them into this group here makes a lot of sense. And this is maybe something the customer said during a call, which might be like more the faster horses think than an actual lead. And we implemented quite a few of them. And we also we took a big step towards a team. And I think that helps us now, right? And obviously the big step should not be build whatever. It should be something which moves the whole company ahead.
Right. So Alexander, we're getting close to the end, but of course, you just said a moment ago that you have a head of AI in your department. AI is all the rage right now. I don't know how long that let's say AI wave will continue, but definitely it is here to stay and it will have an impact. So what's your perspective on the rise of AI and how it might affect software and product development in the future, both from the product side, so the features and so on, but also for yourself as also responsible for technology as an aid to the people developing the product?
Yeah, in general, I think all the tasks where the AI has enough training material will be taken over by an AI. And I personally think in a few years, quite a few of the normal, I call them CRUD, create, read, update, delete developers will be replaced by AI. We're experimenting a lot with querying data sets with natural language, for example, spreadsheets. Instead of then, you have a spreadsheet, well, say with churn data, right? And then you could ask BI, hey, build me a dashboard. But you could also upload it to ChatGPT and just query it with
ask a few questions, exactly.
Yeah, and it's actually pretty good. So I think all these kind of monotonic tasks, right? And I've worked as an engineer, and some of these I felt like, what am I doing here? Right? This I could automate myself, but I didn't have the tools back then. Will disappear. And I think we humans should have to focus on tools or jobs where there's not this vast amount of training data out there.
So one thing that from what you just said, I mean, you talked about if there's enough training data, then AI will replace. And I was just thinking that, of course, there's the CRUD point is very, very well taken. So if it's a basic, let's call it verbose, but very standard programming, like AI is already pretty good at that. So that's for sure. But one thing that comes to mind is also on the role of decision making. AI is much more able to incorporate and relate multiple data points and then propose a decision based on that versus humans, right? Like in humans, we have what we call intuition, which is a very large collection of mistakes and successes that comes together in the form of intuitive thinking and decision making. How do you see AI in decision making?
I have to go back to my point about training data, right? And if you see how the LLMs are trained right now, I can't believe they're really trained on how decisions have been made in the past with which input factors and how the result has been. I mean, we can't do it at the moment, right? Some decisions are made on incomplete data, some by gut, some just because otherwise we cannot agree in this group. So let's take this step forward. And then rarely written down, and I think even less often being made accessible to an AI. So what historic data is the AI basing its decisions on? I mean, it will come over time, I'm pretty sure, but I just don't see it. If we talk about the next 2 to 5 years, I'm not really seeing it there.
Yeah, that's very good what you just said. I mean, I look at it from another perspective. I've been writing and talking about using simulation and portfolio management. So looking at, long-term product decisions, some shorter term, some longer term product decisions. And when I think about simulation, I'm thinking that AI is exactly suited for that kind of activity where you bring in a lot of data and then you can use Bayesian reasoning and whatever and use AI to simulate. Create synthetic data is one idea, but also to actually simulate many different possible scenarios and get likelihood of outcome. So I was thinking more of it instead of like replicating good decisions from the past. I was thinking more of exploring many possible decisions and kind of playing the film forward and figuring out what might happen, because AI is very good at reasoning as well, right? So we can take advantage of, or some AI models are very good at reasoning as well, so we can take advantage of that. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I mean, if you talk about chess, for example, so you take this move or take this move, and it's very easy to assess the quality of the moves afterwards. If you know in product development, let's take, do you build feature A or feature B? How do you assess now looking forward? Like, is that a good idea in 3 months from now?
That's a good point. I was more thinking of instead of the AI giving us one decision, the AI give us like 10, 20 possible decisions with likely outcomes based on the information available, right?
Yeah, but how do you come to this likely outcome? Right? So in chess is easy, that's solved. In product management, how can the AI assess that this feature is well received by our customers or not compared to other features? Does the AI look to all the user research? Does the AI maybe?
That is something that it can do, right? Like, for example, a very simple thing is to look at user interviews and usability tests and then extract like patterns in those. Like that would be one thing. But I mean, this may be even another episode. So I do think we need to move on, because this would be such a great topic as I've been thinking about it since last year. I just did a presentation at OOP at the early part of the year 2024 about this topic. But let's move on, because I do want to explore one more thing when it comes to your experience as a CPTO, or a Chief Product and Technology Officer. If you think about yourself in that role and the type of decisions you need to make, what was the book that most influenced your approach to that role?
I have to say there is no book. I think this Change by Design book I mentioned earlier is maybe was the missing puzzle piece for me to go, okay, yeah, we need this is all one team, only one problem. But I think aside of that, it's blog posts, reading tweets, which I'm not doing anymore. I'm not on Twitter anymore. There's no book.
And of course, I'm sure also networking, talking to your peers, and
Yes.
even attending conferences.
I'm also not doing that anymore.
Yeah, but now you're there, right? So the influence is there. Okay, so first of all, Alexander, it's been a pleasure. We already got one idea, maybe for a later episode on Agile in hardware. But if people want to connect with you, know more about what you're doing, and also know more about VO, where should they go?
I mean, connect with you. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not really on any other social network. You will see that I at one point in time of my life, I decided to focus on a few things in my life and not, oh, no, I'm writing blog posts. Oh, no, I'm tweeting. And no, I'm doing all this. I started to do a CTPO blog, but there's only one entry and that's 2 years old. So it hasn't been so successful. I'm not doing so much. So, but if somebody wants to get in touch with me, LinkedIn.
Absolutely. And we'll put the link to that and to VO, the company that Alexander works at, in the show notes. Alexander, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Thank you.
Oh boy, I bet you are buzzing with ideas after listening to this episode. I know I was. Now, there are so many ways we can help the leaders we work with, so I hope this episode helped you get some of those ideas going and getting inspired, hopefully also to take action. That's what matters in the end, don't forget that. Now, if you want to check out the key lessons from this episode, check out the show notes at scrummastertoolbox.org. But for now, I'll say goodbye and see you in the next episode. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.